You see that big, beautiful wall-mounted PC right there? It's a sexy beast, right? Yeah, I know it looks good. I built it with my own 2 hands. Is it fast? Of course it's fast. It's blazing fast. But today, I have managed to cram about the same amount of power of that behemoth into this little guy right here, the new case that we'll be checking out today. Proof that size doesn't matter. Or at least that's what I tell myself. This portion of this video was sponsored by Klarna.
Kyle, can you take out the trash?
Yeah, I'll do it later.
Do it now. Just pause the game.
I can't pause the game.
I said now!
Ah! Sometimes later is better than now. Klarna is a free app and Chrome extension that lets you buy now and pay later. With Klarna, you can pay in the way that works best for you. Pay in 4 lets you split the cost of a purchase into 4 interest-free payments. Pay in 30 days is a great option if you don't want to pay a cent until you've tried the product and decide to keep it, or you can take advantage of their monthly financing option. With over 250,000 partnered merchants, you can use Klarna to shop at your favorite stores and automatically apply coupons and cash back rates at checkout, so you never overpay again. Klarna's intuitive mobile app also lets you log in, track your purchases, pay in 4 anywhere, and shop for deals. To start saving and paying on your terms, just click the link in the description to add Klarna from any device. Kicked due to inactivity. Great. Thanks, Mom.
You can unpause your game now!
That's not... Never mind. Thanks to Klarna for sponsoring that part of my video. Now back to my regular content. Alrighty tidy, here we go. So this case, this is not a new case. This is an old case. This is the original DAN Case A4. And I used to really like this case. This was my favorite, one of my favorite small form factor cases in its day when it first came out, because for one, it's just so tiny. It's so small and cute. Look at my whole hand can fit on there. It's a little baby. I really like this case a lot because of how small it was. It was very portable, very compact. I brought it everywhere. CES, my friend's place, it was great. The other thing I really liked about it is considering its size, it actually fit some pretty decently sized hardware. You could fit up to, I think, a 300 and something millimeter long GPU. Definitely full-length GPU clearance here. But there were some compromises to this case as well. For example, even though you could fit a lengthy GPU, it was limited to 2 slots. 2-slot design, which I feel like if you're gonna build something that's relatively high-end, 2 slots is not really cutting it as much, because we have a lot more cards that are more powerful, that have beefier coolers on them. So even if you have a 2-slot card and it's a fairly high-end, fairly powerful, it probably has a beefy cooler on it that's wider than 2 slots, maybe 2.5 or even 3 slots. And so this case is very limited in that sense now with modern day GPUs. The other limitation that it had, and I think this is the biggest one, was cooling. You could only fit up to a 90 millimeter radiator in here, which is like, what? 90 millimeter AIOs? Do those even exist? Yes, they do, but they're not very common and there's not a lot of options for them, and they're not very effective. Honestly, you really had to think about what CPU you were putting in here. You couldn't push it too far because the cooling potential in this chassis was just so limited. So fast forward to present day, and DAN Cases and Liam Lee have teamed up once again to make this. This is the A4 H2O, essentially the successor to what I would call a legendary small form factor case in the PC world. I'm very excited about this chassis. I've been waiting for this case for a long time. When they hit me up and said, hey, it's ready, you want to check it out? I hopped on the opportunity immediately. But what they've essentially done here is enlarge the case slightly in exchange for more hardware support. So now we can fit up to a 240 millimeter radiator as well as triple slot GPUs. Look at that, pretty fancy. Now there's a few more cool things about this case that we'll get into later, but I think personally, based on those 2 improvements alone, it's absolutely worth the size increase. Because even when you look at them side by side, the original and the H2O, they're not that much different. It's not that much bigger. So it sounds slightly bigger on paper. This is 7.25 liters going to 11.1 liters. But when you look at them, it's not that much bigger. It's an inch wider. So that's probably the most detrimental increase in size. The height is maybe just shy of 2 inches taller, which I don't think is gonna bother most people just because height doesn't take up any more space on your desk. And then it's pretty much exactly the same depth-wise. It looks like the original is slightly less long at first, but you can see that the side panels actually protrude out past the top panel, making them virtually the same depth. So right off the bat, I'm gonna say that this was absolutely a fair trade, and I would gladly take a slightly larger case for the added features that they've included here. But of course, we still have to do a build in this case just to make sure that nothing's weird and everything's working properly, which is why I have all these parts lying around that I'll be building with today. They're just random parts that I pulled off the shelf. I wouldn't necessarily pair these all together if I was doing a personal build or whatever. They're just kind of there to give us an idea of what it's like to build in this new chassis. Before I actually start building though, I did want to give you guys a quick look at the outside of the case before we start diving in. So for starters, we have aluminum on the outside. All these panels are aluminum, and then we have a steel frame on the inside. Everything is very rigid, feels very secure, doesn't wobble or anything like that. We've got a solid front panel right here, no ventilation, but you do have ventilation on the other three panels, sides and top, and they're all toollessly removable with the help of Lee & Lee's pushpin technology, as was seen on the original DAN case. They're very easy to pop off, assuming that you're not filming with your other hand. Just pops off like that. With the side panels though, you do have two thumb screws on either side that you just remove first. That's just for added security. And then you also have front IO, or left side IO, I should say. So you've got a power button up top, feels nice and clicky. We have USB Type-C, and then we have audio jacks for mic and headphone, as well as USB 3 Type-A. On the back side, you guys already had a peek of that, but we'll take a look again. You have a cutout for your motherboard, and then 3 slots for your GPU. So just like the original DAN case, this does use a riser cable, so you can actually see it right there. I'll talk more about the riser cable in just a second. But you also have this motherboard tray that kind of intersects the case right in the middle. So it sort of divides it up into 2 compartments, just like the OG case, where you've got your motherboard and power supply on one side and your discrete GPU on the other. Up here, we've got a pass-through port for the power supply. So obviously the power supply doesn't get mounted here. It's actually sort of at the front on the left side of the chassis. It supports SFX and SFX-L units. I would suggest SFX non-L if you want additional room in there for managing cables and that sort of thing. On the bottom of the case, we have 2 rubber feet, 1, 2, that span the entire width of the chassis, which I really like. I really like this look. I know most people just won't give it a second glance. They're like, whatever, Kyle, they're rubber feet, get over it. But I think it just looks really clean and modern. I hope this becomes a trend. In my opinion, it just looks a little cleaner than 4 individual feet. And it also just, I don't know, it's probably just a placebo effect, but it just makes the case feel a bit more planted on the desk. And then finally, we have this bottom portion here. This is actually a removable panel. It's got a bunch of ventilation here. And then we have 4 rubber anti-vibration pads where you can mount a 2.5-inch SSD or hard drive. Obviously that would go on the inside of the case. And that's pretty much the outside of the A4 H2O. I think we're pretty much ready to build. I guess I should mention pricing, because I kind of have an idea of what this is going to cost. They didn't give me an exact number, but they gave me a pretty close approximation. So if you want the model with the Gen 3 riser cable, it's going to be anywhere between $120 to $130 US. And if you opt for the Gen 4 cable, assuming that you're going to go with a more modern day GPU, then that's going to run you roughly $155 to $165 US, which I think is fantastic. It's a lot more competitive than what this case was originally priced at. Again, I paid well over $200 for it back in the day. They've dropped that down significantly. I think they realized that the SFF community, the SFF market has gotten a lot more competitive. There's a lot more options out there than there were when this case first launched. And so I think they're just taking note of that and responding accordingly. So you guys let me know what you think of the price though, and the value of this case once this video is done. On that note, let's go ahead and start the build. Okie dokie, we have the DAN case mostly disassembled here with all 4 of the side panels removed. We also have our motherboard assembled for the most part. The only thing I left out is the water block of our AIO. I left that uninstalled because we're actually going to need to pass that through the top of the case and pass it through to the bottom in order to mount our radiator to the top. And I should mention that radiator support is limited to 30 millimeters thick. That just includes the radiator. So you can do up to a 30 millimeter thick radiator and then 25 millimeter thick fans. And that's pretty much the clearance that you have at the top. So the other thing that I removed, apart from the side panels, was the PSU cage. So there's a PSU cage right here. Was originally like that. It's just 4 Phillips head screws. Oops, sorry, it wasn't very flush with the case there. 4 Phillips head screws, and then it simply slides out like so. Very high quality. This is also made of steel, like the rest of the frame. So I think we're pretty much ready to pop this guy in. We're gonna start with our AIO. This is the first step. First step in the A4 H20 is to install the AIO, assuming that you are using an AIO. So we're gonna route it through like this. And just for the record, I've got our fans mounted as exhausts. So they're gonna be at the bottom of the radiator and mounted in such a way where we're exhausting air out the top of the chassis. And then I'm gonna pass our fan cables through. These are technically RGB fans, but there's really no point in having any lighting in this case, so we're not gonna connect those later. And there we go. We just have to mount this down, and we'll just put this here for now. And we just have 4 Phillips head screws that screw into the top here. Taking a look at the top of the case here, you can see that I do have the radiator mounted to the removable bracket that comes included with the case. So again, up to 240 millimeter radiators here. The bracket is also very high quality. It's a little thin, so you don't want to put too much stress on it one way or another. You could bend it fairly easily, but for the purpose of just mounting it and holding a radiator, it works great. Once the radiator assembly and bracket are seated flush at the top of the case, you can proceed to mounting it down with the 4 Phillips head screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the way, the CPU that I'm using for this build, because we are gonna check thermals at the end of this, is a Ryzen 9 5900X, 12 core, 24 thread CPU. This is a CPU that I would never in a million years use in the original DAN case with a 90 millimeter liquid AIO. It would simply be a horrible idea. All right, it's motherboard time. For what it's worth, I'm using these PC cooler fans, these Moonlight. I think they're called Moonlight. I did a review on these fans way back in the day. Very impressed by them. They actually went toe-to-toe with Noctua's in my testing, which is insane, but for a fraction of the price. They make really good radiator fans. They're on the Celsius S24 from Fractal Design, but I don't know where the stock fans for that went, so we're gonna use these instead. AIO shield is in, and we're ready for motherboard mounting. There's very few screws that come included with this chassis. There's the motherboard screws, there's 4 screws for an SSD at the bottom of the case, and 4 for a power supply. Oh, there's also 2 more screws that I will mention later in the video, because they're interesting. Their purpose is quite interesting. But since this is a sample for reviewers and not a retail model, they forgot to include them, but they will be included with the retail model. Okay, motherboard's installed now. Let's go ahead and mount the AIO. Do we have any more thermal paste in here? Looks like it. Plunger's not going any further. There's still a little bit of paste in there, but the plunger doesn't go all the way. Okay, I've got this one. Got another tube, backup tube. Look, the plunger broke, but I can still work with it. And this guy, is this facing the right way? Yes, so notice that the AIO tubes are also needing to face towards the front of the case. There's no possible way that you could actually mount it the other way around, because the motherboard would be blocking it. Just the motherboard tray in general would completely interfere with your tubing. So front facing it is. In case you're curious, not that it matters too much, but we have a 32 gigabyte kit, Crucial Ballistics DDR4 at 3200 speed, I believe. If this is a personal build, I'd prefer 3600 at least for a 5900X, but 32 gigs is very nice, especially on a mini ITX board. All right, AIO installation complete. Yes, yes. And these tubes are sticking out quite a bit. They're sticking out like a good 2 or 3 inches from the side panel, or from the side of the case, which would ordinarily terrify me in the original DAN case, because that case didn't have thumb screws on the side panels. So unless your AIO tubes were completely flush somehow with the side of the case, they would just naturally pop off the side panel, and it was extremely annoying. Pulled a lot of my hair out for that one, but we won't have that problem. We can just literally push this down, kind of force the side panel on there, as long as we're not getting any kinkage in our hoses, and then just go ahead and use the thumb screws, or I guess back here, use the 2 thumb screws to secure the side panel in place. So that's really nice. Forgot to mention that earlier. Okay, this is looking good. The next step would be to, well, I guess since we're here, let's install the riser cable. I should have taken off the stupid cover, the dust cover first before I mounted the motherboard. Didn't think about that. Very tight. It's okay. You guys can learn from my mistakes as usual. I feel like I teach you guys more about what not to do with tech. I'm leading by anti-example. Okay, so got that situated. This is a Gen 4 riser cable, by the way. I'm glad they sent me a Gen 4 cable, so I can use a bit more current of a GPU. All right, that fits in nicely. Now what? Power supply. We've got a nice 700 watt SFX Gold unit here. This is actually pulled from a Height Revolt 3 chassis, which had a pre-installed power supply in it. And I didn't have any other high wattage SFX units on hand, so I had to pull it from that case. Fortunately, it was available though. And we're just gonna mount it straight to the bracket that we unmounted from the case earlier. 700 watts is a little light for the system that we're building today. I would prefer at least 750, considering the GPU I'm gonna use. But again, this is mostly just for demonstration purposes and to get a feel for building in the A4 H2O. Okay, it is a fully modular power supply as well. Already got the cables connected, good stuff. All right, let's mount this puppy. Okay, so before we mount this guy, it's worth noting that it looks like the hoses for our AIO are supposed to pass right over the PSU, right over here. So we're gonna go ahead and have to move them, kind of move them out of the way, train them a bit, although the hoses on this AIO are a bit thick. They're slightly more stubborn to work with. And actually, I should probably put the power supply cables inside of the case first. What am I doing? All right, like that. Yeah, that makes it easier. And make sure that that clears. They pass right through. Oh yeah, that actually works out. Although, where's the area? Like, I guess I'll have to pass the 24 pin cable and the other cables through this little opening as well, which is pretty tight. So let me back this out first. What I'm gonna do first is pre-route the 24 pin cable, and while we're here, the 8 pin as well. So I'm gonna route these along the same path as our tubes. That'll make things easier later on. All right, I think we're good. I think we're okay to mount the power supply down now, although the holes aren't lining up now because the 24 pin cable is pushing up against the PSU pretty aggressively. Okay, there's actually an opening right here between the motherboard, the bottom corner of the motherboard and the PSU, where I could route the 8 pin power connector through there, assuming that it's long enough. If the cable's long enough to reach the connector on the opposite corner of the board, it's possible, but we'll have to wait and see. I can definitely route my front panel connectors through there. So, okay, I just tried to route the 8 pin cable for our CPU through this little opening here. There's just no way it's gonna happen. With the 24 pin ATX cable and these hoses that are just a bit too thick for this case, I've realized now, there's just no possible way that that connector will fit. I could maybe get like a front panel connector through there, like a power switch or something like that, but nothing much bigger will actually fit. Fortunately, like I said earlier, there is this opening right here at the bottom of the case that works quite well. And there's a lot more free room down here because nothing has been routed through it yet. So it's not gonna look the prettiest going all the way across our motherboard here with our 8 pin cable, but no one's really gonna see it, so I don't care. Plugging in the 8 pin EPS cable in small form factor builds is such a pain in the butt because it's always so cramped, and the connector on the motherboard is always in the very corner where it's just surrounded by a bunch of crap. I can't see. I'm shooting in the dark here. They're both in there. Hell yeah. Okay, cool. And honestly, this doesn't look too bad. It doesn't look as bad as I thought because the cable is fortunately long enough for us to route it kind of almost completely out of sight. That's kind of nice. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, now we've got some other front panel business to deal with, like our USB 3, which is a kind of a big boy, 20 pin connector. I believe in you. There we go. Okay, all right. You know what, well, before I plug that in, why don't we just route the rest of these guys. I'm not gonna do HD audio because screw front panel audio and suck it. I do wanna take advantage of our USB-C at the front. So fortunately, he's a smaller guy. And our board does have a USB 3.1 Type-C header on it. Nice. I actually didn't check that before I started building with this board, but I'm glad it has it. And then finally our power switch, which you could just route right here actually, alongside the power supply. Remember when the USB 3.1 header came out on motherboards a few years back? I thought they were reversible, just like the USB-C port is. I quickly found out that they are not. It looks reversible at first glance, but it is deceiving. They are lying to you. Front panel connectors are installed though. So Okay, we only have a couple more cable, like our fans. We have our 2 radiator fans to plug into the board. I'm going to ignore the RGB on these fans. And at that point, we're almost done. Okay, so this is the back side. We've got the power supply right here. You can see our 24-pin ATX cable. We've got our PCIe cable that hasn't been used yet for our graphics card because it's not yet installed. And a bit of front panel connector action going down here. I routed some of the cables kind of in between the power supply and the front of the case frame. So you can kind of see some of the USB-C cable here, USB 3 cable there. But where I got kind of hung up earlier, a second ago, was with plugging in this the power supply pass-through cable. This is the power supply pass-through cable. It goes from the back here where you'd actually plug it into the wall, and then it plugs right into the power supply right up there. I know it's kind of dark and tight, hard to see and stuff, especially with this hose in the way, but that was kind of a pain. I struggled a bit to get this plugged into the power supply, mainly because my fingers are fat. There's very little space in this area to begin with to sort of work your fingers in there. And also, again, the hoses on this AIO, I've learned, are just way too big for this case. So that's a big disclaimer. If you're gonna build in this case and you're gonna use a liquid cooler, get the thinnest hoses possible, and maybe even the shortest hoses possible. It'll just make life a lot simpler than it is for me right now. But I finally got this guy plugged in, and I actually had to pull these hoses, the AIO tube, far out. I had to pull it on this side of the case because it was too cramped. Otherwise, it was hitting the fan blade. The fan would not spin. Is it even spinning now? Uh-oh, it's getting stuck on something. It's getting stuck on the hose. Them hose. I'm just a little worried because once the graphics card's in here, is it going to push this hose up a little bit and interfere with the fan? A fan grill. Fan grills would definitely be a good idea in this case. Definitely a good idea. Not required, but certainly would help. But I guess at this point we can pretty much try installing the graphics card. We've got our PCIe riser cable here, Gen 4, and our power cables right here. We'll leave off to the side. These are just, I just put these up here for now. These are the RGB fan cables that we won't be using, so I'll tuck those away later. But let's go ahead and bust out our GPU. Now originally I was gonna use this RTX 3080 Ti Founders Edition because this case actually supports RTX 30 series GPUs. Well, actually a lot of small form factor cases do, but they're not really optimized for them. And what I mean by that is, based on the Founders Edition design of some of the RTX 3000 series cards, you have this fan that goes on both sides. You have a fan on either side of the card. So with a small form factor case like this, oftentimes that fan will be resting up against the motherboard tray or some tray that's in the middle of the case, which is obviously terrible for airflow. But this case actually comes included with a solution for that, which is standoffs. The case includes two 20mm standoffs. They're 20 millimeters high, and you actually swap them out for the standoffs that are currently installed at the riser cable right here. And that actually brings it further out, 20 millimeters. Actually, it'll be a little bit more than 20 millimeters away from this plate. That way your FE fan won't be completely choked off and it'll actually get some airflow. Unfortunately, those two standoffs are the two screws that did not come included with this review sample kit from Lee & Lee and DAN Case, so I won't be using the FE after all. Instead, rather, dare I try to mount this Asus ROG Strix RTX 2080 instead. I think I'm gonna try. I think I'm gonna try that. But first, I actually need to remove the expansion slots. And if you haven't noticed yet, this case actually mounts the GPU upside down. Not only is it a riser cable on the opposite side of the motherboard, but it's actually mounted inverse. So, you know, that's kind of fun. Doesn't really make much of a difference to me. All right, before I mount the graphics card though, I'm gonna do something here. I'm going to try zip tying this guy, although one zip tie is not long enough. I'm gonna zip tie this hose, this AIO tube, to one of the power supply connectors that's coming from the power supply, obviously, in order to hoist it up away from the radiator fan. Does not interfere with its blades. Will this work? I have no idea. Probably not, but I'm willing to try. That looks like it could work. Let's try to mount this GPU. Oh, I definitely need that those 20 millimeter standoffs for this riser cable. They wouldn't just come in handy for the Founders Edition GPUs. They would also come in handy for cable management, because right now I cannot push this graphics card flat enough against the motherboard tray in order to get it slotted into the riser cable, because there's too many cables. The cables be too thick, bruh. All this, it's not working out. You know what I'm gonna do? All right, so basically here's the deal. I can't really progress. I cannot install the GPU right now because A, this hose is too thick and these cables are too thick and it's just not mounting flush enough, and this riser cable is too close to the frickin' motherboard tray. So what I need to do is either swap out the AIO for one with thinner tubes or get some 20mm tall standoffs that were supposed to come included with this case and swap them out so I can bring the riser cable further away from the motherboard tray. I think I'm gonna do the latter because screw undoing all the hard work that I've already done. It's kind of a pain. So I'm just gonna go ahead and buy them online right now, hopefully with Prime shipping. If I buy them on Amazon, they'll be here by tomorrow or 2 days from now at the latest, and then we'll continue the build on from there. And at that point, fingers crossed that we don't run into any more issues. All right, we're back. And what do you know? I've got the standoffs that I need now, these 20mm long ones. I actually just bought this kit off of Amazon for a few bucks. It's probably like 9 or 10 bucks. It comes with a variety of different standoffs and screws, but we're only really interested in the 20mm tall ones because these are the ones that are gonna get our graphics card to fit properly with the expansion slots at the back of the case. So first rule of order here is to unmount the riser cable. There are 2 screws holding it in place. 1 and 2. Well, that was easy, but before we get these new standoffs in here, we have to remove the old ones, which are right there, of course. And these look like they might be like 6 to 8mm tall. Definitely not what we need for our Founders Edition card. And then we simply swap out those for the new standoffs. And these standoffs that I bought are made of nylon, which I would have preferred metal, but they didn't have any metal ones with Prime shipping. I would have had to wait a few more days for those to come in. It was like, it's not worth it. But nylon will still get the job done. They actually threaded in pretty easily. I was a little skeptical at first, but they do the trick just fine. But there you go, 20mm standoffs installed. And then we just gotta mount this guy back onto here, lining up. Looks like it's lining up just fine. Sorry if I'm like blocking your guys' view, you can't really see very well. You'll just have to use your imaginations. Okay, we are ready for graphics card. Move that guy, and we'll deal with this cable later. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, the other thing is that as I was trying to push the graphics card into the riser cable wasn't staying put. It was actually kind of sloping down a little bit because, again, the standoffs are nylon. They're made of nylon, not metal. It's another reason why I would definitely highly suggest metal standoffs if you are going to be mounting a GPU this way. Those 20mm ones should be metal just to keep the riser cable in place when you're pushing down on it with the graphics card. But I was able to just sort of push the riser cable up into the graphics card once it was mounted where it needed to be, and that seems to do the trick. So, okay, the graphics card is installed. Uh-oh, there's a problem. Hear that? That's the sound of the fan blades on this fan hitting one of the cables that's back here. How is this possible? Okay, never mind, we're good. I got the fan working, the fan's spinning, it's free, it's not caught on anything. I was just able to stick my finger back here and kind of press down on some of the cables and the hosing, and I got it to stick to the point where it's no longer interfering with the fan. So I'm kind of spinning the fan with my finger, with my pinky right now. I can see it turning, hold on, but I'm pretty sure the fan's free. Yep, I just saw it rotate. Okay, so we're good. And the fans at the bottom here, the radiator fans for our AIO, those are also free as well. I got the hoses zip tied to the bottom of the case here. I actually just routed the zip tie through a couple of the ventilation openings at the bottom plate where you mount the SSD, and that's just barely enough to get those hoses to clear this radiator fan right here. I'm looking at it right now. There's probably maybe 2 to 3mm of clearance between the lowest point of the hose and the fan. So we just barely scrape by there. The power supply cable, there's really no good place to put this without interfering with this fan right here. So I'm just gonna leave it kind of loose. It should be fine once I put the side panel on. Oh, actually, we have to connect the GPU. I mean, we have to plug it in. Duh, we need power. So unfortunately, this 12-pin adapter does make it a little bit more cumbersome up here, just adding a bit more cable length to an already very cramped space. But I'm pretty confident we can get by. Okay, yeah, that actually stashes away just fine. Okay, it's going fine. It's totally fine. Nothing will go wrong. Let's mount this back. Yeah, it goes this way, right? Nice, 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 nice. Oh, this will be the ultimate test to see if the other side panel goes on because of this freaking hose that's sticking out. Can you see how much that hose is protruding from the side of the case? Look at this. They need to start making some manufacturers, AIO manufacturers need to start making some small form factor AIOs with shorter tubing. Shorter tubes would be nice. Some of these tiny builds, just saying. I think we can work with this though, hopefully. The tube is quite flexible. Ooh, if I can actually tuck it right, ooh, look at that. Oh, nope, that's also blocking the fan. Okay, that fan's still going good. All right, if we just try to force it, if we just force the side panel on and screw her down, that might be enough. Might be enough, let's see. See. Oh, okay. And we're not pinching the hose down. At this flatness, to make the hose this flat for the side panel to get on, it's not pinching, or it's not, what's it called, kinking the tubing whatsoever. So we're good there. And it looks like even without the thumb screws to secure the side panel on, it's fine. We technically don't need to screw those in if we don't want to, because it's not popping off by itself, but it's just gonna instill a bit more confidence if we do. So I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it for both side panels here. There we go, all the side panels are on, everything's sitting flush, and this build is complete. Let's go ahead and turn it on to make sure none of the fans are getting hung up on any cables or tubing. And if that all looks good, we'll go ahead and run some tests. Okie dokie, artichoke, here we go. Uh-oh. Oh, it turned on. Okay, that was weird. It was so quiet when it first turned on, which is a good sign. That means none of our fans are being caught. Thank God. Thank the Lord. Second question, will we post? Please, God. Oh, no. Maybe it just needs a second. Just needs a minute to warm up, that's all. Everything's fine. All right, let me try flashing the BIOS and see if that works. Please. Thank God this motherboard has a BIOS flashback button on the back, by the way. That makes it a lot easier. Didn't have to uninstall our AIO water block and drop a 3000 series Ryzen processor in there just to get a video signal, then update the BIOS that way through the BIOS. But did it matter anyway? Did it even matter? So if the video signal is still not showing and the BIOS is up to date, could be a couple things. First culprit is the PCIe riser cable. I learned from the NR200P build that I did recently, riser cable, well, I already knew that riser cables were finicky, but that is now, anytime there's a riser cable involved, if there's no video signal, apart from the BIOS update, that's the first thing I look at is the riser cable. And it's kind of interesting because this is a Gen 4 cable. I confirmed it's definitely a Gen 4 cable. We're using a Gen 4 card, but that's still not a guarantee with a riser cable because riser cables, they suck. Gen 4 riser cables are a piece of crap. The whole Gen 4 thing is a mess when it comes to riser cables. So I'm thinking maybe, another thing that'll prevent your riser cable from working is if it's not plugged in. You can see at some point along the build process, the riser cable was accidentally popped out of the motherboard slot. So yeah, I think that might be it. Haha, look at that. Did the trick, worked like a charm. Who knew? Things need to be plugged in order for computers to work. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and install Windows and then we'll get testing. We're gonna do some thermal testing. Thank God this didn't turn into a nightmare troubleshooting video like the NR200P build. Once that's installed and I got drivers in there, I will give you guys a final look at the system's performance, its behavior, and what kind of thermals we're getting out of this little guy. All right, we're here in Red Dead Redemption 2, running at 1440p, 2560 by 1440 to be exact. And we've been going for about 25 minutes now. Arthur is galloping on his little horsey, and you might notice some black screen flickering here and there. That literally just started happening. It was totally fine the entire time, and I just noticed it started flickering. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. Drivers are up to date. I would assume, again, that maybe the riser cable is to blame. Maybe it's pinched, maybe it's bad, or going bad. I can't be sure, but that's kind of irrelevant to what we're talking about here. The system is, apart from the flickering now, operating smoothly. And you can see that our graphics card is hitting around 72C on the core, which is actually not too shabby when you consider this is an RTX 3080 Ti that's inside of a small form factor case, only 11 liters large. It's at 95% utilization, so practically full load there, getting around between 1850 or 1840 and 1900 megahertz thereabouts, pulling about 345 watts from the wall. That's just the GPU, not the total system load. But so far, the system hasn't powered down as a fail-safe to protect the power supply, so it looks like the 700 watt unit is working okay for now. Again, I would probably recommend 750 if you were we're running a configuration with these specs. But that being said, we're eating about 6 gigs of VRAM, and our CPU is hovering at around 73 degrees Celsius. The hottest I've seen it get so far is about 80 C. On the GPU, it hasn't really passed 74, 75 C, but the CPU did hit 80 C. I think we were in a cinematic at some point, and it did get a little toasty. It's actually kind of surprising how warm the CPU is getting, considering that it's at a much lower load than the GPU. You can see we're only hovering at around 30 to 40%, sometimes lower than that. I think this is just attributed to the fact that we have a Ryzen 9 3900X in here, and the fans are set to exhaust, which means that they're actually sucking up all the heat coming off of the graphics card, maybe not all of it, but definitely a good chunk of it, before it's actually passing through the fin stack and the radiator. So that could be heating things up. I'd be very curious to see how temps would be if we flip those fans around to intake, pulling fresh air from the bottom. There's not a whole lot of room at the bottom of the case for airflow though, so I can't imagine that it would be much better. There's probably only about a centimeter or so of clearance between the desk that the system's on and the actual bottom of the case. So I can't imagine that would do much. Maybe if we elevated the case off of the feet a little bit more to provide some more airflow, but hard to say for now. Overall though, these are totally acceptable temperatures, especially on the GPU. I'm very surprised at how low it is, considering that this is a Founders Edition card. I was a little bit nervous at first that our rear-facing fan on the GPU would still be choked for airflow, even though we are using those 20mm standoffs, but it seems okay. And this is of course without, oh, we just hit 83C on the CPU. It's getting a little toasty there, getting a little toasty, but bear in mind this is without any fan tuning on the AIO fans, on the radiator fans, and in a case like this, a small form factor case, it's very common to undervolt your CPU so that you can get those lower temperatures. Sometimes you get some insane results, like you can drop the CPU temps by 10 degrees or more without really incurring that much performance loss when it comes to frame rate, especially in a game like this where it's more heavily GPU bound than anything. If this was my personal build, I'd definitely try flipping the radiator fans. Oh, and I'm about to get shot. Oh, damn it, I'm making a bit, you sons of bitch. Anyway, I would try flipping the radiator fans. For one, I would definitely tune the fans to get a nice sweet spot between acoustics and thermals. And finally, I would certainly undervolt the CPU because it's just getting a little too toasty for my liking as is. On the GPU side of things, I don't think I would change a thing. For a 3080 Ti, I don't really see much point in overclocking it, especially because it's really not getting any sort of intake for it whatsoever. I mean, the intake is just straight from the side of the case. It's getting it directly through the ventilation on the side panel, but there's no actual fans in this case that's blowing fresh air towards the graphics card. So I would probably just leave that alone. I don't think there's any need to undervolt the GPU though, unlike the CPU, just because the temperatures are just fine. They're looking really good. But yeah, at the end of the day, I really think this A4 H2O case is a huge step over the original DAN Case A4, simply because with that original case, you would not be able to squeeze this level of power inside of such a small chassis. There's no way you could get, certainly not an RTX 3080 or any 3000 series Founders Edition card in there, because that rear fan would just be completely choked off. So I really appreciate the flexibility that this case offers over the original. And there's absolutely no way in hell I could ever cram a Ryzen 9 5900X 12-core processor inside of the original DAN case without shitting bricks. I mean, there's just absolutely no way that's sustainable on a 90mm radiator. Just impossible. But in this case, while the temperatures on the CPU do tend to get a little bit too high for my liking, there's certainly room to tweak that. And you can certainly bring those temperatures down by doing a number of those things that I suggested, like undervolting, for example. The end result is a very tiny but very fast PC that, as you can see, at 1440p at Red Dead Redemption, we're pretty much on ultra settings. With DLSS on balanced mode, we're still getting over 100 FPS on average, which is pretty fantastic for a demanding game like this. As for acoustics, the system is staying much quieter than I expected it to. It's still under full load running the same game, and I'll lean in so that you can hear it on my mic. Mic's right here. I'll back away. This is ambient noise in the room. And this is how it sounds from a more, I guess, realistic distance if I were playing a game right now. It's a very scientific test. Going into this review, I had a feeling that this case was going to be a huge upgrade over the original DAN Case A4, and I still stand by that opinion. I think it's a huge upgrade, mainly because of the additional hardware support, and honestly, the extra space that it takes up over the original case, I think is well worth it, considering how much more hardware you can cram into here, and how much better cooling you can get as well, particularly with your CPU. So, also just, I gotta shout out again the price drop. Thank you, Liam Lee and DAN Case, for dropping the price on this case and making it more competitive. I think it makes makes it a very compelling option for people who are looking to cram a lot of power into a very little space. But you guys let me know what you think. If you like this video, toss a like on it before you go. Get subscribed for more tech content on the way, and I will see you guys in the next video.